Just wrapped up fighting Primeron, and that fight took a lot out of me. I tried to move away from a strength build, that's what I used during my time in Elden Ring, and every fight outside of this one was a dex build. But Radon, after hours of trying, I just had to bring out the hammer. Bonking is the path to godliness per Mikola or whatever. Now, I have seen a number of complaints online about the DLC that I do want to discuss because some are valid while others feel like we just didn't play the base game. And don't mind the old man, he's just sleepy. Let's dive right in. After 40 hours with the DLC, culminating with an insanely difficult boss fight with Primeron, I've come to the conclusion that while I really enjoyed my time with Shadow of the Erdtree, and I think it's some of FromSoftware's best work, there are some aspects of the game that could have been handled better, and the first thing that really pops out is the new leveling system. Now, I personally don't have a problem with it. I think that the Skadu tree fragments and revered spirit ashes incentivize exploration, and like the base game, you are more than likely rewarded for thoroughly exploring an area. But I can see where people would say that searching for 50 fragments and 25 ashes would become tedious. Some of these fragments are in hard to find places, and with the difficulty of the bosses, it can be frustrating to know that before you continue fighting, you might have to put things on hold and do some exploring, otherwise you're going to meet the same fate over and over again. The constant exploration can interrupt the flow of the game, especially because traversing legacy dungeons is already challenging, and by the time most players reach the boss arena, the expectation is that they are ready. So I do understand the frustration for those players who aren't looking to explore, even though that was emphasized in the base game. In this case, I would have loved to have seen FromSoftware adopt the Sekiro method of leveling up, where the difficult bosses served a dual purpose. Not only do they provide a new weapon or skill, but they can also give a nice performance boost so that you're prepared for the next challenge. Once again, I don't mind the new system. I really enjoyed exploration in the base game, and I found the level design here to be a lot of fun. I just think that the amount of fragments that you need to upgrade can be a bit much, especially when you start to get to the later levels and fight some of the harder bosses. You are scrambling at times, and you might overlook a number of things. So I totally get this criticism. With that valid criticism out of the way, I do want to talk about complaints about the map next, and how I've seen a number of posts state things like how difficult it can be to find certain areas. And listen, I understand that the map in Shadow of the Erdtree is going to house a number of different secrets, but I feel like that complaint doesn't make sense because Elden Ring held a lot of secrets, and almost every other Souls-like held a number of secrets. The general rule of thumb in these games is to roll through walls, drop down openings, and don't always travel on the beaten path. If you aren't being actively deterred in Shadow of the Erdtree, meaning that a major obstacle is in the way, Torrent will find a way around. In fact, you can skip R'Lana entirely if you happen to thoroughly explore, because there is a way around one of the fortresses that will get you to the next major area. You just have to do a little bit of exploration. Shadow of the Erdtree does an excellent job of using vertical space, which means looking above and below can be the answer to your problems. I didn't find the map hard to navigate. I think the biomes are pretty distinct from one another. The only area that I really didn't like was the Abyssal Woods. Not because of the enemies that can directly kill you, but because there's a lot of ground to cover on foot, and Torrent is the best option for these types of spaces. I understand if people see the Shadow of the Erdtree map as a puzzle, but so was the base game. You still have the golden path to follow, and it is marked pretty clearly on your map. But if you want to beat all the bosses and experience all the side content, you need to be thorough. I'm going to dismiss any complaints about the map because I found this to be some of the best work FromSoftware has done. Now, not every area is a hit, but they are generally excellent, and some of them, like the Jagged Peak, have some of the best walk-ups to a boss in recent memory. When it comes to the boss fights, this is where I've seen the most complaints. I just want to say that FromSoftware has been consistent when they drop DLC. The boss fights found in almost every DLC is harder than any fight in the base game, and that rings true here. The Orphan of Kos, Midir, Manus, you name it. Those bosses found in the DLC of their respective games were far harder than any of the bosses found in the base games. The developer is known for this and has not strayed away from this in any game they put out DLC for, so I kind of have no clue what people were expecting. In Shadow of the Erdtree, you are given a number of new weapons: spirit ashes, summons, talismans, just a whole lot of new tools in general to assist you in your fights. I feel like the complaints about this mainly stem from being a combination of the new leveling system and the fact that enemies are practically on Melania's level or above her. Like the base game, you need to be properly leveled and you need to adapt. And that's basically how it was for every fight in Elden Ring as well. So once again, I'm kind of confused about these complaints. Bosses in this DLC try to close the gap often and will challenge the player regardless if you summon. The base game was balanced around Spirit Ashes and Ashes of War, and that really hasn't changed here. The difference is that the bosses will not allow you to play recklessly because your spirit summons can die fairly quickly if they are not leveled, and each boss has an insanely damaging AoE attack. And that's whether it's Rolana dropping Twin Moons, Mesmer throwing massive serpents at you, and Borson doing a Psycho Crusher, or Bales using a wide-sweeping AoE lightning attack. It's clear from the first boss that FromSoftware wants you to be challenged, because by the time you get here, you have more than likely faced the most difficult bosses through Elden Ring and have completed a fairly thorough run. If things have stayed the course, then you're probably breezing to the end, which is clearly counter to what FromSoftware wanted players to face. Every boss having a second phase and a critical state was really exciting because it felt like a desperate fight to the death, and some bosses pulling out an insane trump card to prevent you from winning is something I can appreciate in that moment. You aren't left to your own devices, and like all previous titles in the library, you can approach fights as you please. But it's clear that FromSoftware wanted to give you a challenge, and I think that they succeeded. When it comes to complaints about the bosses, I think the only one that I really feel difficult to argue against is any criticism that's levied toward Primeron. This fight is weird, primarily because the first phase is about learning his combos and dropping him to a third of his health, which is difficult to do, but it is manageable. His gravity spin is easy to time, the meteor strikes can be dodged running to the side and jumping, and some of his combo strings can be relatively easy to learn as you understand what he starts the combo with. If you see him strike the ground, you're probably going to see a 4-hit combo. If you see him just swing downward, you're going to see a 2-hit combo. Once you kind of get into the rhythm, I think the first phase is really easy at times. My problem is the second phase, because 1, I wasn't expecting the laser light show, and 2, he is insanely aggressive. There might be 1 or 2 moves where you can really guarantee a heal, but I feel like if you aren't aggressive with the openings that appear, you're more than likely going to lose this fight because you do not want a war of attrition, because the demigod is easily going to win that. Every attack is now accompanied by beams of light. He has after image attacks that are meant to confuse your timing, and he can now punish attacks from behind with AoE stomps. He also has an ability in which he goes invincible before he dashes forward and attacks, which I don't think I've ever seen a boss with invincibility frames before in a FromSoftware game. And while it looks really cool, not being able to do damage while he's stationary for a few seconds is kind of frustrating. This is the only fight in the game where I feel like even with the max level of Erdtree fragments and revered spirit ashes, it doesn't feel like you're on close to equal footing. With other bosses, you're going to know whether or not you'll need to explore to ensure that you're at or above them in terms of level, because you'll see it in the damage output. With Primeron, it just doesn't feel like it's enough, and you will know just how damaging this boss is by the time he hits you once. If he hits you twice in a combo, you're more than likely losing half to 3/4 of your health, and that can be really daunting when you see it. Using Spirit Ashes during the first phase, by the way, can feel like a waste if you aren't doing enough damage. His AoE attacks in the second phase are almost to kill your summon fairly quickly, so I think it's best to learn the first phase so that you can summon during the second phase, and that summon can be of some assistance when they're trying to draw aggro, so it gives you time to breathe. I love the look of this fight. I think it's truly epic, but this fight is unlike any in the base game or the DLC, and I think I wanted to play Shadow of the Erdtree in a different manner than I did in the base game, but I just went right back to bonking because I was getting tired and I really wanted to win. I'm not gonna lie, knocking him down, breaking his posture is super entertaining, and it felt like winning to me because I get to see him down on one knee, kind of struggling to get up. I loved it. Beating Primeron is an accomplishment no matter how you do it, and I, for one, do not care how you win because I'm rooting for you. While I understand some of the complaints that the community has, and there are some that are totally valid, I think overall Shadow of the Erdtree is pretty great. Outside of the Primeron fight, which can be seen as a personal complaint of mine or just a skill issue, whatever, my only real issue is that some of these epic fights lack entrances and voice lines. I kind of wanted to hear M. Borson, and that's Gaius, by the way, when I keep saying that, talk shit to me when he started to float up in the air for the first time and he hit that Psycho Crusher. I understand the Erdtree avatar not having any lines, that totally makes sense, it's a freaking plant, but R'Lana and Radahn saying nothing felt off. I'm not a big lore person by any means. I generally get all my information from YouTube videos, but those two characters, like Mesmer, have direct connections with other demigods, and I really think it would have added to those fights. Most of them just kind of show up and just do their thing, which I respect, and isn't a deal breaker by any means, but at least have some energy when we show up. Everyone needs to be like Egon, who, by the way, is the best NPC ever in a FromSoftware game.
Behold, a true great warrior, and I, Egon, your fears made flesh.
That man shows up screaming and goes down screaming. I brought him into the fight with Bill because he deserved to win, and I wanted him to see me take down that big dragon bastard with the Dragon Hunter's great katana. Listen, if you're gonna drag yourself up Jagged Peak, then you have all of my respect. That fight with Bale was amazing, and I love the fact that Egon kept that energy the entire time. I need more characters like him in the future, please. Well, him and more. Look at him. He just wants to hang out and sell stuff. He's not trying to cause problems. To wrap things up, yes, FromSoftware could have gone on a different path than the one they currently have with the Erdtree fragments and the revered spirit ashes, but for the most part, I don't really think the system is bad. I just think it's just there to incentivize exploration. Sure, it could have been optimized better. Yes, I do really want them to bring back the Sekiro leveling because I really feel like beating a boss, then being rewarded with a boost in performance is something that I really want. I really want to see that again, so I'm hoping that kind of shows up in their next game. But to me, when the developer goes out of the way to create a tutorial message for the new leveling system, you should probably keep that in mind in the event you go into an area and you find out that your damage is suboptimal. I think that maybe if the release date for Shadow of the Erdtree wasn't 2 years after the base game, maybe they treat the DLC like the others, where you're just leveling normally and the bosses are just really hard to fight. But FromSoftware has never been the developer to do things the way everyone expects. For example, if you haven't been on social media, people are really questioning the implications that the new lore has on the base game, and my general thoughts are, no god is good, power corrupts, and I need HR when I'm grabbed by Primeron so that Mikola can whisper in my ear. It's very uncomfortable, I don't know why he does that. Regardless, I think that this is some of FromSoftware's best work, and like the base game, the good and great far outweigh the bad, and some of the complaints are things that the community has heard before and will continue to hear whenever the developer drops their next project. Shadow of the Erdtree is going to divide the community some, but I think Elden Ring did the same when they introduced Spirit Ashes. There's just honestly no pleasing everyone. But I do believe that this DLC will be held in high regard when all the dust settles. But let me know what you think. What are some of your complaints about the DLC, and what are some of the things that you absolutely love about Shadow of the Erdtree? Because that's going to do it for this video. If you happen to like the content, please consider like, sharing, and subscribing. I'm Ken from Pixelated Thoughts, and I'll talk to you next time.